Trad wife, boss babe, the ups and downs of both, and ultimately respecting every woman's choice. Ladies, we've all seen them. The images of the traditional wife, maybe the devoted homemaker of the 50s and 60s, people that we saw in early sitcoms. This was once prized and accepted as the gold standard of womanhood. Often because women just really weren't presented with other choices. She kept a perfectly curated, Instagram-worthy home. She had children who were just, impeccable with their manners. And she supported her husband's every whim, often putting her own ambitions on hold. But as society evolved, so did the expectations placed on women. Am I right? Or am I right? I know, I'm right. And now we're faced with this. The media and internet culture want women to choose sides. They're asking us to choose. But the reality of it is real life does not necessarily agree with what the internet is coaching and training us on. Should we label and place judgment? We'll explore that in today's show. If you're listening to the podcast, you can find it on YouTube at Travel Life by a Pilot Wife. This is your co-captain speaking, Jackie Almer. Make sure you grab the Pilot Wife checklist and other goodies over at pilotwifepodcast.com. Now, please note, this episode is in no way about asking you to choose sides or attacking either side. It's more about slowing the conversation down, bringing mutual respect to both sides, listening, and again, respecting each woman as capable of choosing what is best for her and her family. And then, of course, I'm going to bring my own wisdom and lived experiences into a very noisy debate. So stick around to the end of the show where I'm going to give you some tips on how to start the conversation with your current or potential spouse and how to determine for yourself what best serves you. And make sure you like the episode, drop me a comment, and this helps other people who are searching for this type of information find it. Now, just a few decades back, the trad wife was the accepted norm. I kind of grew up with that, even though my mom actually went back to work when I was in 5th grade. Women were expected to find complete fulfillment in homemaking, and yet many felt unseen, unheard, and limited by these choices. The 70s feminist movement sparked a shift as women realized, hey, there are more and more choices available to me, and I can pick and choose and hop around and figure out what's going to best be a fit for me. So women fought for independence, their careers, and personal fulfillment outside of the home. No doubt this change was monumental, right? It created more opportunities, and at the same time, it created some very complex thoughts, decisions, realities, and conversations. Is choosing to be a homemaker now just considered a lack of ambition? Or is it a choice that should be accepted and appreciated with the same respect given the career woman, or what I'm terming the modern woman? Although I have to tell you, even that term is like nails on a chalkboard, because I think both sides are still modern women. The question becomes, how do women today find their most fulfilled self? What matters, and how do we define success? The 80s and 90s became the Superwoman era. Women were expected to do it all. I'm even dating myself back to the 70s, with the Angeli perfume commercial. I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan, and never ever let you forget you're a man. Yeah, well, it wasn't quite that simple. Women were expected to do it all: career, kids, marriage, home life, and everything, especially today, curated to perfection on the socials. But with this new expectation came exhaustion, overwhelm, and a lot of soul searching, thinking, is this all there is? The pendulum had swung from homemaking to juggling every role imaginable, often at the cost of mental and emotional well-being, and potentially with these costs trickling down to the marriage and to the children themselves. So how do we balance it all without losing ourselves in the process? Now, today, the term trad wife is making a comeback. In the last few years, I've seen it, having wide exposure and debate and all of that on the internet and social media. And the arguments rage from labels and judgment and you should be doing this, etc. Of course, when are the socials not filled with that? The internet is literally obsessed right now with labeling women and especially labeling wives. Some see trad wife as regressive, while others celebrate it as a return to meaningful, intentional living. So, how does one navigate these social judgments? The trad wife today is deep and nuanced, okay? There's no doubt about that. It's not simply filling the same roles that we experienced in the past. Some women are choosing to embrace traditional roles, not out of obligation so much, but out of a deep personal choice to slow life down, to nurture their families, to create a well-curated life in real life, not necessarily to create that curated life to show off on social media, but truly to embody it and live it for ourselves. And they aren't always just lacking in their own career or their own income. There are many women today who are figuring out how to be home with kids and create an income, create fulfillment in a career type environment. The difference, it's all about choice. Today's traditional wife isn't just about serving a husband, serving the kids, serving the family first, and then putting our own needs on the back burner. It's about embracing a lifestyle that aligns with her values, right? And incorporating the spouse, the children, all of those values into it, whether that means full-time homemaking, part-time work, or running a successful business from home, perhaps a YouTube channel. The 90s ushered in an almost need for the two-income family. So in some situations, I get it. A lot of people can't get away from being required to have two incomes in order to simply survive, not just to thrive, but to survive. So balance isn't all about doing it all. It's about doing what truly matters. The modern woman, again, I'm bringing that phrase in, the modern woman is redefining what it means to have it all by focusing on those intentional living choices, all right, those intentional career ambitions and intentional homemaking and a mix of both in many cases. The truth is, fulfillment is going to look different for every woman who's out there. And again, I bring back that word respect. I know for me, it's important to respect every woman's duty, if you will, to themselves to make the right choice for themselves and their family. Perhaps duty isn't the right word, but I think you know what I mean, right? Nobody wants to get to the end of the road and say, wow, I wish I would have made different choices. Somewhere in between, a lot of this lies. And the real question is, are you living in alignment with your values? And then, of course, where does the pilot wife persona fit into the trad versus modern wife debate? So I'm going to share now with you my thoughts and opinions after decades in both roles. And again, this is not meant in any way to sway anyone, to say that my way is right. I'm just sharing what I've pondered through the decades and again, what I've actually lived myself. In my opinion, the aviation lifestyle lends itself to non-traditional type of living in every way possible, if we choose to. And of course, that incorporates both good and bad. Trad wife today is often defined as a modern wife of having one's own career, one's own income, being independent, rejecting role stereotypes, and being more embracing and demanding of shared household and kid duties. I think that's important even in the trad wife world. So the trad wife, again, often has the same definitions. So how I see the pilot wife model of the modern, somewhat trad wife is the freedom, the flexibility, the flight benefits, the experiences that this type of lifestyle enables if we choose for it to. Experiences can create very well-rounded children who truly have the best of so many different worlds with seeing different places, experiencing different cultures, and well-rounded children grow into well-rounded overall adult human beings. This can also lend itself extremely well to the entrepreneurial path and instill creative, independent, and freedom-thinking values in children. I think of my own daughter as an example. She chose to go to college, get her 4-year degree, do all of that. But once she came out and graduated and went to work for a real estate company, she quickly realized that more traditional 8 to 5 or whatever type of role wasn't a fit for her. And at first I was kind of surprised, thinking, well, I'm sure what we expected coming out of college. But then I had to reflect back and realize She had grown up in a household that did not have two traditional corporate America or corporate wherever type of role models. She had a father who flew and, was mostly gone Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, home on holidays, home on weekends, able to volunteer in the classroom, just so many different things that he was able to do. And then myself running my own business, I literally 100% controlled my own schedule, worked from home, did all the rest of it. So when I had to reflect on that, I thought, well, of course, she has no experience with a parent getting up, rushing around, going to daycare, because my children never did go to daycare. Running on that, not being available if they're sick, or, just so many things that have to be juggled with that. So, of course, it would serve itself that she would be kind of conflicted with choosing that type of lifestyle. So my story is, I was never the woman who dreamed of getting married my whole life, planned my wedding ahead of time, or absolutely knew that I wanted children. I could see myself in either and many different roles. And part of that was because I was in the airline industry before I married a pilot. So I already had a love of travel, a love of schedule flexibility. I worked a 4 on, 3 off. Then I went into sales and marketing and traveled around and just really was able to experience a lot of different things. So looking ahead for me, I could see myself as a single career woman. I could see myself as a married career woman. I could see myself as a mom fitting into that. I didn't have any predetermined path of what I absolutely knew that I wanted. Yet at the same time, when I met and then ultimately married my husband, the pilot, I grew to strongly desire these particular roles. Falling in love with him, sharing our values, deciding to come together in marriage, I could see that that was a role that I definitely wanted for myself with him. And at the same time, I could see that he would be a person that I wanted to have a family with. And then, of course, we went through premarital counseling, which I highly recommend for anyone. And this helped us tremendously in setting goals and then learning how to communicate honestly about what we both wanted out of life, out of marriage, out of a family, and our expectations individually and mutually. And from that, we were able to navigate how we saw setting up our family. We both agreed from the very beginning that we wanted kids and we wanted a stay-home mom. I had no problem with that. And one of the reasons this mattered to me is because, as I mentioned, my mom was a stay-home mom. She went back to work when I was in 5th grade, and I randomly and mysteriously developed a massive case of asthma shortly after she went to work. They ended up taking me to a specialty clinic in Denver, Colorado. I lived in Durango, small town. They ended up taking me to a specialty clinic where they did a lot of testing, allergies, all the rest of it. And I still remember the doctor, who clearly was way before his time, bringing us all into the office, his office, and saying, "What has changed in the family? Like, has anything radically changed?" And through his questions, we ended up determining that my mom going back to work was a huge shock for me, that I wasn't quite ready for it. And I'm assuming he put on his psychology hat, because once we went back and we kind of talked through it, and I agreed that I kind of liked the independence by 5th grade of being able to come home and, let myself in the house and make my own snack and just kind of do my own thing until my parents got home from work, I began to realize that wasn't such a bad thing. And miraculously, I never had another asthma attack, and I haven't since then. So it was kind of funny. So, once I did choose to become a mom, I have to be honest, and even my kids know this, it left a lot of me very unfulfilled between the diapers and the feedings and the, having a hard time even showering by yourself and a lot of those type things. I was a little bit unfulfilled. I always say I was not a great tiddlywinks mom. Once my kids got old enough to play games and do some of that, I really enjoyed it. But the early stages of just, this constant routine of just caring for them and getting them through the day was a little unfulfilling. So I went looking for options from home. My dad had owned his own business almost my entire childhood growing up. He was there. He made breakfast for us every morning, attended all of my events at school and stuff like that. So I could see the potential to have a business and yet still fulfill that parenting role that was very, very important to me. And what I knew about me just from my younger years, I'm ambitious. I love to do a lot of different things. I like taking on roles of leadership. That started in middle school when I ran for student government and was in student government, my entire school career, if you will. I'm motivated by money. That doesn't mean that it's the most important thing to me, but I loved making money. I loved learning about business and how I could, hang my own shingle and do my own thing and generate extra income and different things like that. I remember back in my very early days, one of my first jobs working for McDonald's, I won the lunch hour contest every single Saturday by learning how to take orders, set up trays, wait, do this, do that, and whoever brought in the most sales at their cash register at the time would win like a $25 or something, which back in that day was a lot of money. And I won almost every single Saturday because I was motivated by that, and I was motivated by putting in systems and different things like that. So ultimately, I knew I wanted my own business. I tried a lot of different things. Succeeded at all of them to some extent. I never lost money in a single business endeavor that I took on. I remember I wanted to buy a computer, so I started a word processing business, a lot of different things. But over time, I learned that I was trading time for money and that some of these weren't going to fit so well with a small child or a growing family at home. And one of the things I know about me, and this is important to determine for yourself, I am not risk adverse. I am not afraid to put myself out there. I'm not afraid to try different things. And I'm not afraid, I guess, in a way to be publicly watched or embarrassed even if I don't make a huge success of it. There is no such thing as failure. Every failure that you have is a step on the ladder, on the rung up to the success that you're ultimately looking for. And I ultimately learned to see things like that pretty early on. In 1994, now I'm really dating myself, I launched my first direct sales business, and I took that business online in 1999. That changed everything. Again, I go back to being ambitious. I have a love of learning, and I am not afraid of taking risks and different things like that. So I took my business online. That changed everything. Over time, I went on to out-earn my husband, all while working from home and having 100% complete control over my schedule. I was able to get the kids up, get them ready, cook them breakfast, make their lunches, send them off to school. If they had a sick day, no problem. They could stay home. I could always rearrange my schedule. Back in our Lake Arrowhead, California days, we would have snow days. Again, no problem. Nothing had to change. I didn't have to call a boss, ask for permission, or try to juggle any of that. If we wanted to travel on a whim, we could. All of that was purely no problem. As my business and success grew, I traveled a lot, and I began speaking at events and conventions, putting on some of my own, and often I would take my daughter with me. She shared the stage with me at an early age, and she ultimately developed a love of travel, a love of independently knowing that she could make her own money and not have to play by the rules of the corporate world. And it developed an independent streak in her that made her, again, say no to the 8-to-5 corporate culture world. Now, I look back on that and I think, do I consider myself a trad wife? No, I consider myself more of a rad wife, forging my own path. Through this, I never feared a loss of autonomy or identity, even though I was married and at home, and often claimed the status of being a stay-home mom because in so many ways, I felt like I was. But I didn't feel like that gave me a loss of my identity. I didn't feel financially dependent on my husband. I didn't feel like there was a power imbalance between money or a fear of being trapped. Actually, my husband loved my income, and he loved the flexibility that all provided. And he very often shared with my children, mom did this for our family, mom's business provided this, different things like that, and helped them realize how important my contribution was to the family. Because again, they didn't see me, put on my business suit and run off to the office or drop them at daycare or any of that. They never really saw me leave the home for work because I did almost all of it online from home, with the exception of when I would travel. And even that was probably 3 to 4 times a year, three to 6 times a year probably. Why did this work for us? Well, we had the conversations ahead of time in that very important premarital counseling. We continued to have conversations at the different phases and stages of our marriage, both pre and post having kids, because what you think your life is going to be like often is not at all what it ends up being like. Now, I mentioned money. Back in the late 80s and 90s, separate money and banking accounts was just really starting to begin. I can remember just barely, I don't know, maybe I wasn't even out of high school yet, but I worked at the Chamber of Commerce in Durango, Colorado, and I remember one of the full-time staffers there. She was fairly young, not very many years older than me, but she was recently married, and I remember her talking about how they had separate bank accounts, and how they were both contributing to the family pot. Now, the problem with that was he made a whole lot more money than her, and so she was spending a huge part of her income, paying half of the rent, the groceries, all of the living expenses, and having very little left over for fun money or to do different things like that. And he was in a different situation. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of their marriage. What I do know is that within a few short years, they divorced. And I always wondered if any of that had to do with it. And again, I was young, but my experience was that my parents had shared all their own money. Then later, as my husband and I were dating, we went out to dinner. We did a lot of travel and different events with another couple in the airline industry, and they were the same thing. They were married, but they split their money. Like they each had their own checking accounts, all of that, and they kind of did the same thing. But the interesting thing was, I always found it so curious. We would go out to dinner, and sometimes they would haggle over who was paying that bill, or if they were both going to put in, how they were going to split it, all of that. And it was kind of uncomfortable. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone who splits up their money does it this way, but it was often uncomfortable. And I remember when my husband and I agreed to get married, he said to me, I have a request. Can we just share our money? And then his second request was, will you handle all the bills? Because he's not a detail person in that way. He didn't like it. His checkbook was balanced rounding up. Mine was balanced to the penny, and we had to actually use my checking account for several months after we got married till we could catch up with his and start a new balance and then close out mine and move everything over to his. So that was kind of funny. And then just even a family member who married her second, or actually it's her third husband later in life. Both of them are on their third marriages. Both of them have grown children, they have grandchildren, they have assets, and they don't share their money. And theirs is a very interesting situation too, which I never really understood until I actually asked her once how all that worked. And she explained to me, well, when you marry later, like into your 50s, and you have your own assets and you have grown children and all of that, it can get really dicey, taking some of that, what's assumed to be an inheritance or whatever, away from the kids. I'm not going to get into that story, but it made sense to me, at least for the time, and it works for them. So again, for us, shared money has worked. We have aligned goals financially. Neither one of us are big spenders, so we don't have a lot of conflict. He doesn't spend a lot of money that's outside of what we've agreed upon. I don't do that either. We each have an agreed upon roughly idea of discretionary income, income money that we can spend without, quote, asking for permission or any of that. And so consequently, we don't have that money imbalance that can happen when the finances are split. Again, this is not a right or wrong. I'm just sharing with you what worked for us. And I know different people try out different things. And so I want to share that I don't believe that it has to be any different even today if you sit down and you have those conversations to begin with. Now, I know for me, one of the things that I never wanted to do was have to ask for allowance, especially in the early days when I first started staying home with children. I left my job. I was in the airline industry too. I retired and I hung it all up, and it was a couple of years before I started my own business. But I never had to ask for allowance because, again, I was handling all the money. And so there was no imbalance there, right? There was no money imbalance. And I realized for me, the idea of asking for allowance or getting a stipend or whatever you want to call it, that's my own issue. That's my own control issues and different things like that. Not everybody feels that way. That's just mine, and I totally acknowledge that. But I also know that money can be the great divider. And I've seen that with several couples where, again, he makes more or perhaps she makes more, and the money is not split evenly. They're sharing, evenly the expenses, which I would hope that if anybody was going to do that, it would be proportioned out, right? This income's here, this income's here. And so proportionately, what each person is going to contribute to the shared fund of housing and groceries and utilities and living expenses would be split evenly in that way, not necessarily split in half across the board. But again, not my conversation. However, I would love to do an episode on this. So if you'd be willing to come on the show, contact me. Go to pilotwifepodcast.com. You'll see the little box there to click and just submit the form to me, and I'll reach out to you and we will schedule that. I'd love to have a roundtable discussion with maybe 3 or 4 or 5 of us to get a lot of different opinions on how it's worked. Everything from beginning marriage, in the middle, and perhaps later life marriage that I mentioned with the one family member who's in that situation. See, the pilot wife model forces a degree of independence as we negotiate life alone and negotiate life together. And let's be honest, the pilot wife model also, we know that we are forced often to make important decisions solo because they're in the air, they're gone, internationally, whatever it is. And sometimes decisions have to be made on the fly. Unfortunately, today's work environment often makes it possible for women to truly create a new way of working. And of course, that's dependent on the job or career path that they choose. But, we have women pilots out there who I so admire, who can bid schedules around their children, around their families, around kid events. They can take their kids with them on some trips, especially as the children get independent and older, right? And they can carve out, albeit not perfect, but what life is perfect, a truly nice blend of career and me time, being away, with the family still largely centered first. And honestly, anyone in aviation can do that. I remember for years talking to flight attendants who had done the same thing, who said, I only fly 1 trip a month, but it's perfect. It allows me to get away, have some re-energizing time, some regrouping time. I usually slam click in the hotel room. I'll order room service, maybe go to the spa, whatever it is. Not on every trip. I don't want to make it sound like it's overly glamorous, but sometimes there's that opportunity, and it really helps one recharge those batteries. I know doctors even who I've listened to them on podcasts who've carved out job shares with potentially another female doctor, or in some cases a male doctor. This doesn't have to be gender specific, right? It's just really deciding what you want, the career path, and then having those conversations and figuring out, especially today with ChatGPT, it's amazing what you can figure out and begin to develop those plans around a job share or truly working part-time. There are many professions that allow this, and sometimes it just simply requires you asking for it. I always say, if you don't ask the question, the answer is automatically no. But if you do ask it, who knows where that might lead. Now, today, for me personally, again, from my lived experience with grown children and a grandchild, a granddaughter, I see my role as a mom and my family as, looking back, the most fulfilling role I've ever had. I wouldn't trade it for the world. All that I've done, all that I've accomplished in the business world is certainly fulfilling, and I'm proud of it. But more than anything, I'm proud of the family that I've raised, the experiences that we shared, looking back and really feeling like I put out 2 very decent, upstanding human beings into the world, while at the same time, I feel like, yes, there was a little compromise, but for the most part, I was still able to fulfill my own desires, requirements, ambitions, and many different roles and hats, pun intended, that I wanted to live. In my very list of core values, family always comes first. Family always comes first, and the experiences that I have with them. And then that leads me to continue to look for ways to bring family and experiences into my career, still traveling some, still doing some speaking, still doing a lot of those different things. I want to also now expose my granddaughter to these different things so that she knows that there are choices out there for her, that she can choose to be and do and ultimately have whatever she wants with some negotiation, right? It's not like any of it's easy street. None of it's easy street, right? Life is full of challenges. It's full of compromise. It's full of self-doubt and looking back and asking questions. But ultimately, that truly is what makes life rich and memorable, and those experiences or everything. So again, not asking anyone to choose sides or saying that my way is right. I'm just sharing my lived experience, how I feel about it all looking back, and hopefully offering some perspective to you, regardless of what stage you're at right now in your life. So I mentioned that I wanted to share some tips on creating a life that you love, a life that you embrace, that you wake up every morning and say, yes, I love my life, and the rules that are within it. So I'm also going to share how to start those conversations with your current or potential spouse and how to determine for yourself what best serves you. First and foremost, it's important that you sit down and you define yourself. You define your priorities, both personally, in the marriage, and as a mom and a member of a family. What are those priorities? What are those boundaries? What are those expectations? What are those ambitions and different things like that? What ultimately brings you fulfillment? And once you've created that list, which by the way could be ever changing, this is a conversation that I recommend that you have once a year, ideally, maybe at the first of the year, maybe at the end of the year, maybe on your anniversary, whatever works for you. Then you sit down and you have that conversation with your partner where you ask them to do the exact same thing. And then you look at those two lists together and you discuss what fits, what overlaps, what are the potential conflicts, how can we work through those and make sure that both of us have the most fulfilling life possible. The next tip, create a routine that works for you. Now, in aviation, sometimes it's difficult to create a routine because it can change from week to week, month to month, all of that. But there are certain things that you can begin to create a routine around that works. Not what society expects of you and not what your family and all the rest of the people involved expect of you. This likely is going to be the thing that's going to take the most time because stages and phases of life change. Our goals change, things that we like change. We change as individuals. All of us do. That's just called human growth. So it's going to take some time and some finessing as you work to get it right and get it right as possible. Again, knowing things are going to change. Kids grow, needs change, and so it's important that we bring in that F word that's part of aviation for sure, but part of life in general, and that's flexibility. And then again, once you have sat down and created those routines for you, share your needs, boundaries, and expectations with your partner and ask them to do the same. Creating routines often are around, if I travel, I know this is one of the things that was important as a routine for my husband. When he walked in the door after a trip, he didn't like to be hit with everything that was going on. So one of my goals and roles, and this was for me, not because he asked me to or demanded it, I always wanted to make sure that he came home to a clean, orderly, calm, peaceful house. So I did my best to make sure all the toys were picked up, even if they were just thrown in a box and dealt with later. I didn't want him walking in and kicking and tripping and, mess and chaos everywhere. I tried to have dishes out of the sink. Were there a few occasionally in there? Absolutely. But I didn't have, 3 days worth of pizza crusts and all the different things going on. I really wanted him to walk into a home that was calm, peaceful, and that he wanted to come home to. And he always did the same for me too. So again, I don't want to make this too trad wifey to where it's like that was my only role. It wasn't like that at all, but that was just important to me. And that created peace, calm, and order for me as well. So those are some of the things. And he liked to come in, go change his clothes, get out of his, flight uniform, put on something comfortable, and often unpack his suitcase. That was just his routine. So I always gave him the space for that, to do that with no expectation of conversation or takeover for the kids or any of that. Now, were there exceptions? Yeah, sometimes for sure. Maybe I wasn't feeling well, a kid wasn't feeling well, they needed something. And I will say, he was smart enough and flexible enough to allow himself to bend in the midst of all of this too. Okay, the third tip is nurture your creativity and your passions. You're more than just a role, more than just a series of roles. So find what it is that lights you up. A solid partnership and a solid family is going to thrive when we each individually create happiness and fulfillment within ourselves. And then we can create those within the partnership, right? It's not fair to have this expectation that one person or someone outside of you is required to create your happiness and your fulfillment. That starts from within first, and then it spreads into the marriage and the family. Remember this, put your own oxygen mask on first. And these tips are prime examples of putting your own oxygen mask on first. And then finally, ignore the noise. I mentioned this already, but for God's sakes, ignore the noise and the outside opinions and labels, whether it be social media, influencers, or even your own family. It's your life, it's your choice. Your own family, your parents, your in-laws, your siblings, and others, as well as friends and acquaintances, quite often want to tell you how you should be living your life. Never let anyone should on you, and don't should on yourself either. There's no need to argue about it. What I've learned to do is if somebody wants to offer me an opinion, and it might not be one I'm open to receiving, I listen, making full eye contact if I'm in person, and then I just simply state, you know what, thank you for your opinion. And then I change the subject. This is so powerful because it acknowledges that you've heard them, you've taken the time to hear them, so they can't really say, hey, did you hear that? I mean, they might say that, but they don't necessarily have the authority to. And it also sets the tone that you are not open to a discussion that involves trying to change your mind. And that's the most important thing. Again, that goes to setting boundaries. So what does being a trad wife, career wife, or rad wife, as I like to call myself, or simply a fulfilled woman and wife mean in today's world? It's about balance, it's about choice, and it's about rejecting societal guilt in favor of what makes your soul happy and your family happy and what all comes together to feed all of you. At the end of the day, success comes to the one who lives life on her own terms. So what are your thoughts on the evolution of the trad wife? What do you think about the modern wife, the rad wife? Do you resonate with the traditional lifestyle, a modern career path, or a blend of both? Please discuss it in the comments. Drop me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are, your experiences are, what I might have missed, and share your story with us. And while you're at it, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and like and review the podcast. And then make sure you grab the Pilot Wife checklist. And if you're floundering in all of this and want to have a simple conversation, set up a time for a free call together. That's at pilotwifepodcast.com. I'll see you next week as we continue the adventure, the journey, and the conversation. I'm Jackie Almer. Thanks for being here. Hey, pilot wife and fellow aviator, I'm Jackie Almer. With nearly 4 decades as a pilot wife, I'm here to help you navigate the ups and downs and turbulence that can go along with this lifestyle. To learn more about the resources and coaching I offer, go to pilotwifepodcast.com and make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, Travel Life by a Pilot Wife.